I had actually started working on this chapter in June of 2016. I had great hopes to finish this chapter in June of 2016, but life intervened. But what actually happened is I interviewed the founder of the EAFL, which is the Emirates American Football League, on June 28th at their headquarters, and I had gotten to know them a little bit because I had personally become interested in this program. Ironically, the chapter that I wrote is about how they use social media to communicate their message, and at the same time create a community among fans and their players' families. But the irony is, I first became aware of the EAFL when one day I was walking into the mall of the Emirates, and on one of their digital billboards in the mall, it just had a little ad with a schedule of who's playing who, and I thought, what is this? And I looked at it, and I remember taking a picture of it and looking at it later going, what is this, American football? And the funny thing is, I didn't even realize this till 2 weeks later, but one of the locations that they played their games at, was literally, I could see the stadium from the balcony in the apartment I was living at the time. In fact, I was recording a video for something I was doing online and saying, oh, there's some kind of athletic activity going on behind me. And I realized later it was them. So it was destiny. But what intrigued me about the EAFL is here you have an organization that is all about American-style football. So for the most part, in this part of the world, when you say football, everybody thinks of the wrong football. When you actually use your feet with, I don't know. And so it was kind of really interesting to me, like, how did this organization come about? Where did it even come from? How do they get the message out? How do people even know that they're there? And outside from my own experience of becoming aware of it from my sort of less technological way, I was kind of curious, how did they get the message out there? And now the organization was founded basically by expats. The main founder was Dustin Chernowski, and he actually played for the Saskatchewan Roughriders. He actually won a Grey Cup with them. For those of you guys who know Canadian football, he was a defensive back for them. So he won a Grey Cup, I think it was 2007, and like a lot of people, he found his way out here shortly thereafter. And through a kind of series of odd things happening and coincidences and you know, life happens and serendipity, they formed this league with some other people who had either started something similar but maybe less formally or had some interest in doing so. And they actually, their local sponsor is one of the sheikhs from the Al-Qasimi family in Sharjah, and he actually played tight end for them for 2 seasons, I believe. And so they have their primary base is expats, and what's interesting though is their main focus is they have 4 youth divisions starting at 8 years old, and then they have an adult division that they call men's that's from 19 and up. And so a lot of what they do is, I think it depends on the year, but they have somewhere between usually 400 and 500 players per season. And the season starts, I think it's like, well, with conditioning, things like that, it's like September, kind of October, and then they take a break in December when most people go for holidays and things like that, and they come back, and then every year their season ends in March with their version of the Super Bowl or the Grey Cup called the Desert Bowl. So they just completed their 5th season here this past March, and they have, I believe, it depends on the year how they kind of divide out the teams, but usually they have about 7 different teams, and they primarily play in Dubai, in Abu Dhabi, either at, like in Dubai they play in Sports City, and then they also play in Zayed Sports City in Abu Dhabi, and they also play in Al Ain, and sometimes like at the Sevens, that area out there. And then this year they just launched an expansion team in Doha. So they've gone outside of UAE now, and they're really expanding beyond that. And what was fascinating to me is understanding how they communicate with their current players and how they communicate with people who are interested. And for the most part, Facebook is their franchise quarterback. Those of you who get that phrase, right? Facebook is their main driver. and because it's where everybody is. In fact, when I asked Dustin to refer me to a couple different players to interview, it was really funny. He connected me with one player who was 14 and he plays in their youth league, and then he connected me with a player who's my same age, I think he's 43, and he played in the adult league. And for the most part, I was messaging with the 14-year-old on Facebook to get his information, so I'm like, oh, that works, okay. And then he was a great kid, and he was really full of energy and enthusiasm. And then the other guy, mostly I emailed, but so I had a lot of opportunity to chat with both players and then the person who runs the league, and I was able to kind of pull it all together and give a kind of a brief overview of the different ways. So it's mainly Facebook, followed by their own website. Their own website is more than just information, although it's very robust. It has schedules, and it has game video and game photos, but it's also, you can log into it, you can create a user account, and then you can kind of get information about the league from there. So I think it's mostly where they're starting to have their players go now as kind of a main central point. They do use some traditional advertising, like in Sport 360, primarily you'll see a lot of articles about them there. And they have some arrangement, I forget how it works, but there's some arrangement where they pay for some certain kind of advertising and then they get a lot of coverage also. Lately I've noticed they've been using Instagram a lot more, and they've also been using actually Facebook Live a lot more, which has been interesting. So it's been great to see that happening. They have been using YouTube throughout, but mainly what they were using YouTube for was just post-game interviews, things like that. But what I've noticed now is they're integrating the YouTube video more into their Facebook pages, where they put it on their website, and they're trying to do what I would call cross-pollination more. So lately I've seen, like, again, use a lot more Instagram. When I was actually interviewing with Dustin, I had him set up a Snapchat account for the league, and I don't think he's ever used it. I don't think there's a lot of use for Snapchat for the league. I think probably a lot of the players, at least the younger ones, probably use Snapchat, but I don't think there's a lot of appeal or purpose for the league itself to use Snapchat, so we'll see. But it's been interesting to see how they grow. They're definitely in a growth projection. And what was really more fascinating to me too, just as an American, is there are a ton of American-style football programs around the world. Like, there's something like 1,000 different programs or something like that. I forget I have the numbers in here, but it was really impressive to me to see how many different programs there are functioning at any one time. And so to me, that was probably one of the more interesting things. But again, at the end of it, one interesting statistic I just wanted to share with you, because I did a little bit of background about social media use here in the kind of Middle East. And one interesting thing is, let's see. So in the Middle East, there are 93 million people actively using social media. 99% of people in the UAE use social media. It's the world's second highest penetration after Qatar. And it really was negligible. It was almost a tie. It was like, 99.2 versus 99.15 or something like that. So we're pretty close. The one other interesting fact was that there are more mobile phones here than people, which probably isn't a surprise to anybody, right? So in the Middle East, there are 312 million mobile phone subscriptions and 246 million people. So that makes sense. I mean, that's, even anecdotally, that would make sense, right? But that was interesting to me to get that statistic, because that shows where so many people are. And again, if you're going to market something, you need to make sure that it's mobile friendly, right? Both in terms of the content itself, but that you were able to share it and that kind of a thing, put it out there. So anyway, thank you again to Kevin for inviting me to contribute this chapter, and thank you for his patience and his cheering me on in those last few weeks. And he's right, I didn't sleep a lot in those few weeks, and I think I lived in my office more than I normally live in my office. But I was really thrilled to be able to contribute to this, and really excited to be able to, especially give it kind of a local spin. And so I'm really grateful for this opportunity, and I thank you for it.